you could take like all the ayahuasca in the world or something. You would never come up with an outcome this outlandish and hard to believe. But that's where we're at. Hello and welcome back to the Plugged In Podcast, a weekly news show about the future of transportation. I'm Patrick George, Editor-in-Chief of InsideEVs.
And I'm Tim Levin, Senior Reporter at InsideEVs. This week we're talking about Tesla's not-so-great quarter, and we'll get into what Elon Musk has been up to these days.
Then stick around for our chat with Revel CEO and co-founder. We're going to talk about how to increase EV charging access in tricky, dense places like New York City. But first, Tim, how you been in the last week?
I'm good. As you know, I've spent a bunch of this week at a clean energy conference in San Francisco. So I've been rubbing shoulders, hobnobbing, talking to people, handshaking. It was a lot, but I'm glad to be back. Glad to be back at my desk, to be honest.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of people time. I find that like post pandemic, I still struggle with that. I call it my social battery. It's like, it gets to a certain level and then I'm out. And then it's like, it's just go sit alone in a dark room for several hours, which is also kind of the symptoms of a concussion. I don't know. Like it's kind of the same thing, but you feel like your social battery's up for some recap and some news after that conference.
Yeah, we gotta. But yeah, it was good. I talked to Lucid CEO Peter Rawlinson for a while, which was really interesting. That guy's got a super interesting perspective on EVs and what makes EVs great. So look forward to that. Some of that coverage on the site.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Lucid's always interesting to hear from when you talk about making more and more efficient EVs without using big batteries. And we don't have to go into that this time because we got plenty to talk about. But right before we recorded tonight, we were hearing Ford's Q4 earnings call, and Ford CEO Jim Farley was up there saying, like the big battery approach, like a big 200 kilowatt hour battery for trucks, and SUVs. He's like, it doesn't work. We tried it. I believe the term he used was unsolvable, which is a heck of a thing for Ford Motor to say. So I think that, like more and more like guys like Rawlinson are being proven right here when it comes to batteries. So we'll have to get him on this show at some point, But I think for now we got plenty to talk about another EV company, right? You want to kick us off and talk about what's going on with Tesla?
Yeah, sure. That was really riveting banter, really riveting casual banter about EV efficiency.
Both of us are very tired. It's been a long work day. It's been several long work days. We're doing our best.
Yeah. Okay. So Tesla. Last week, Tesla reported fourth quarter and full year earnings. Most key numbers in the quarter were down in Q4.
Yeah, annual sales at Tesla down for the first time in about a decade. And that's not what investors want to hear, especially as the entire EV market, like in the US and globally, grew quite a bit last year. But Tesla, the OG of this stuff in the modern world, was down. And that's even after they added a new vehicle to their lineup, the Cybertruck, which, adding a pickup truck usually should increase your share of the market. And even that didn't really put a dent in things.
Yeah. Tesla's share price, despite that, those sort of lackluster earnings, their share price rose slightly following the earnings and also are up 61% since the presidential election, since early November. A lot of that is because of Musk's relationship with Trump and people obviously betting that Tesla's going to benefit from being close to the new government. But also it was kind of, the emphasis on this call, I think, which we've kind of gotten used to over the last, year or so of these Tesla earnings calls, is that it was all about humanoid robots, which is they call the Optimus bot, and autonomous taxis. Like that was what Musk and his guys spent pretty much the entire call talking about, and I guess that's what got people excited enough that the stock was up and not down despite the actual fundamental numbers. Yeah. But to get into a little bit of it, Musk repeated claims that that Optimus and Tesla robotaxis would make Tesla the most valuable company in the world by far. He said Tesla could be worth more than the next 5 top most valuable companies combined. He also said that the humanoid robot could bring in $10 trillion in revenue, which is stuff that, like I said, we've been hearing a lot of. I don't know. We'll talk about what we make. We'll talk about what we make of that in a little bit. But I think the bigger news, and the big news for us, and kind of the more immediate sort of news, was about robotaxis. And after over a decade of Musk and Tesla making big promises about putting out a self-driving car, which they haven't done yet, Musk said that in June they're going to start a Tesla robotaxi service in Austin. And so this is going to be the first time that Teslas will actually have self-driving cars without a person in them watching what they're doing. And that's a big deal for a company that has been promising stuff like that for a really, really long time, that has been selling a software called full self-driving for like several years that has not been fully self-driving yet. So those are kind of the broad strokes of what we heard on the call, and the latest from Tesla. Patrick, what do you feel about this moment at Tesla? Like, what do you make of kind of the news last week?
First of all, I just want to say that I think capitalism is magical, because sometimes it turns out you can miss your revenue projections by over $1 billion, and also, miss your sales targets and be down on sales for the first time in over 10 years, and then your stock price still shoots up. So just, it's if you believe in yourself, it always goes up, baby. It's amazing. No, this is a weird one, right? And I think you hit on it earlier when you were like, this is what we heard last couple of calls. Like, for about the last year when Tesla's done their earnings calls, the story's been AI, robots. It is very telling to me that, like, investors had a lot of questions about the affordable new Tesla models. Like, when are they coming out? Like that's seen as the key to growth, to getting sales numbers up. Like, the competition's getting more and more intense out there. When are the $25,000, the $20,000 new Teslas coming out? Very little information about that in this call. I think they repeated some boilerplate they've done at least the last couple of quarters. The word Cybertruck was not mentioned once on this call. Not at all. Like, they didn't talk about improvements coming to it, new trim levels, price getting better, range getting better. It's just, there's been a kind of a theory that, like, Elon is really kind of like lost interest in being a car company, and sort of like, doing the boring work of duking it out with like Volkswagen and Nissan and Ford and them. But, like, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, this is where all of his money comes from. It's where all of his wealth comes from. And they really tripled down on their most ambitious yet undelivered promises on this call. I mean, he said some outlandish stuff like, over time, the factory line is going to be built to make, 100,000 Optimus robots, a month. It's just really like Optimus robots will be whatever the market wants to charge for them. It's really just like hyped up, crazy stuff. And the market bought it, like their investors like, okay, cool, man. We trust you. Like, you're the guy, you've delivered value so far. You're buddies with Trump now. Like, we have no reason not to believe it. Not every analyst thought that. I saw some stuff from JP Morgan that was like, okay, this is starting to be a bit of a house of cards here, but there's some weird stuff at work here, I think. Well, let's cut into some audio from Elon himself. Let him elaborate on what's next.
We made many critical investments in 2024 in manufacturing AI and robotics that will bear immense fruit in the future. Immense. Like, it's, in fact, to such a scale that it is difficult to comprehend. I see a path. I'm not saying it's an easy path, but I see a path to Tesla being the most valuable company in the world by far, not even close. There is a path where Tesla is worth more than the next top 5 companies combined. Some of these things I've said for quite a long time, and I know people have said, well, Elon's the boy who cried wolf like several times, but I'm telling you, there's a damn wolf this time. And you can drive it. In fact, it can drive you. It's a self-driving wolf. I think this will be the largest asset value increase in human history. Maybe there's something bigger, but I just don't know what it is. Optimus has the potential to be north of $10 trillion in revenue. Like, it's really bananas. And our goal is to ramp Optimus production faster than maybe anything's ever been ramped. Meaning, like, aspirationally, an order of magnitude ramp per year. It doesn't take very many years before, we're making 100 million of these things a year.
There's no phrase that Elon Musk likes more than orders of magnitude.
Orders of magnitude, yes.
Literally, you would kill yourself if you played the orders of magnitude like drinking game on the Tesla earnings call.
I think Bloomberg, they have this like bingo chart for these calls that they've set up. I'm pretty sure orders of magnitude is one of them on there. So that should be the free space, honestly. So yeah, man, like bold claims, and also very little about the new Model Y. I just want to add that real quick, is that, that really kind of came and went. I mean, it's not out yet, right? But the best-selling EV in the world, by some metrics, the best-selling car in the world, did not have some big announcement delivery event. It's just like, it just kind of showed up on their website. And now we're not talking about Cybertruck at all. So he's really hinging this company's future on robots and AI and the robotaxi service. We don't know the details of that business plan. He will only say, the Optimus robot will cost whatever the market demands it to cost or something. So it's a lot. I mean, like, what's your read on all that, man?
It's kind of more of the same of what we've been hearing. I wonder when the check will come due around all this stuff. Like, how many earnings calls in a row can you talk about how enormous the Optimus robot is going to be, or how big robotaxis are going to be before you actually have to show something on paper, like show some progress? Apparently that hasn't happened yet, but I feel like it's got to happen sometime soon. I mean, for context, like we've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. Tesla makes almost all of its money selling cars. Like, it's a car company.
Yeah.
It's valued like a high growth tech company, and it's valued even greater than some of those high growth tech companies. Like, it's not even in the same like universe as somebody like GM or Ford, and maybe that in some way makes sense. Like, maybe Tesla should have a little bit of a premium. It's like an innovative company that's making innovative cars, but like, does it need to be worth $1.5 trillion? All like mostly hinging on the promise of robotaxis and robots. I don't know. I don't know when that check comes due, like I said.
To play devil's advocate, though, it's like, I feel like journalists like us, analysts, have been saying that for years, for like a decade. Like, the check's due for Tesla, and it never is. He just like keeps ordering more steaks somehow at the high dollar restaurant he's at, where he never has to pay the bill. And I am, of course, skeptical of humanoid robots, like, for sure, especially since like most of the demonstrations they've done with those so far have been teleoperated, or in at least one memorable occasion, a guy dancing in a suit. But I do believe in that kind of old Steve Jobsism that's like, people don't know what they want most of the time until you show it to them. But I can't get past the fact that like this technology is all across the board so deeply unproven and so far afield of everything else that they've done, and that these investors want to see more affordable new cars come out, and the market wants more new affordable EVs. Like, people want to break up with gasoline if you make it cheap enough and easy enough for them to do. So I don't know. It's just, it is a baffling one all around. But the stock price is up, and we're gonna see what the hell happens in Q2, I guess.
Yeah, and you mentioned that they had some boilerplate about future models, which is something they've said a few quarters in a row now. Tesla is planning, they say, new models coming out in the first half of this year. We still don't know what those are. They didn't talk about it at all in the earnings call. And one funny thing that I noticed is, like, all the time, I've been listening to these calls for years. Investors or analysts will ask about, like, mostly the retail investors will ask, what's the status on the new model coming out? And Musk would always say, I really think earnings calls are not the place for new product announcements, and just move on. But when it comes to like robotaxi rollout, this is the perfect place to announce that we're going to be rolling out robotaxis in June. So, he talks about what he wants when he wants. It was really weird to me in the same way that the Model Y, the new Model Y refresh didn't get any, like, there was no press release or like roll, like any
event
kind of
or something. Like a YouTube video even. Yeah. I mean, well, at least the robotaxi rollout got that had a whole big to-do thing in Hollywood last year, and like a big
I mean this exact, like, the news that Tesla is gonna roll out robotaxis in Austin. Like, it was just like, it was literally just like him mentioning it on the earnings call. They didn't they didn't like put out anything about it.
No, and it's also like, it's like, oh, if earnings calls aren't the place to do product announcements, like, you don't do them at all. Like the new Model Y, that shit just showed up on your website one night. Like when I was watching Slow Horses with my wife, having a nice time, and then it's like, oh, there's the Model Y. I should go back to work. Thanks, Elon. So it's an odd one, man. Do you want to go over any other numbers from that call too? You wrote down a couple interesting ones that you found worth highlighting here.
I'll run through a couple of the numbers just in case people are curious, and then I'll just quickly detail like what we actually know about this robotaxi plan. So Tesla's this is last quarter. Tesla's revenue increased only 2% year over year. Automotive revenue fell 8%. Operating income dropped 23%. So it was
not good.
It was not a great quarter. It was not a great quarter for Tesla, and you wouldn't know that based on the stock price. But I think the robotaxi news is interesting, and this might finally be the moment. Like he's been talking about this for 10 plus years, and now he has said in June we will have cars on the street in Austin without a person operating them that people will be able to like hail as a rideshare vehicle. And so here's what we know about that so far. Musk said that self-driving Teslas would hit several more U.S. cities this year after Austin, followed by a nationwide rollout in 2026. Again, like, take all this, I think, with a grain of salt, given how these deadlines have been missed in the past. And one of the big kind of promises of the Tesla robotaxi vision for like several years is that you as a Tesla owner will be able to add your car to this network, and it'll be able to go and pick people up and drop them off like while you're at work or whatever, and earn you side income. This has been a big part of the business.
Or 10 years he's been promising this. Yeah.
And he answered a question about that on the call, and he said that will not be this year, but maybe next year. So like the full self-driving going to actual people, like actual customers, is still not quite around the corner.
Yeah, which is an idea that makes sense in theory, but I remember he dropped that back in 2018. It was like, oh yeah, like next year your Tesla will make you $30,000 a year in side hustle income, and some people actually bought it. They're like, where's my side hustle income from my robot car, Elon? So I don't know. It does raise the question, right, of like, when is the check due? And I think this is especially relevant in America right now because, we were sort of talking about this off camera earlier. We talked about this with the staff at InsideEVs, and like, how do you cover this current moment in America, in the government, with Elon Musk? Because after all these big promises, he flies to Washington D.C. And spends the weekend with his Doge buddies, who are all children apparently, setting about dismantling the federal government. And they've already supposedly seized control of Treasury Department payments and targeted USAID. And it's like, that's a hard thing for us to cover, right? Because like, I want InsideEVs to obviously not be partisan, because the future of transportation is for everybody. And politics and cars are always intertwined to some degree, like policy, trade rules, the chicken tax. That's why cars are what they are. But like, when you try to stay focused on the EV market and the future of electrification, you kind of can't talk about that stuff unless you're talking about Tesla and talking about Elon Musk. I do believe that those things are intertwined. And the big question in my mind, like for InsideEVs specifically, is like, where is this guy's focus right now? Because that was a weird, baffling earnings call full of promises about robots after some really crappy financial results and a downturn in sales. And all of this guy's money comes from his wealth, and all that comes from Tesla stock. It's not from his many other like successful ventures. Like we know that Twitter/X financially, that's in the toilet. Boring Company, Neuralink, XAI, like they're valuable on paper. They haven't done anything. They're not public either. It's like this is where all of his money comes from. Is Tesla, and is Tesla going to rot? And if it does that erode the power he's now exerting, in Washington D.C. And I think that even if you're somehow like super jazzed that he's like just coming in and dismantling the federal government, maybe you do believe that. I think it's still worth asking, like, where does this guy's power to do that come from? And is he neglecting, like, the most valuable car company on earth by doing this? Because as he does this, like, the other night, it's like 1,000 people showed up in Washington D.C. outside the Treasury Department. They're screaming, "Lock him up!" to Elon Musk, to the CEO of Tesla. And it's like I in my wildest, like, you could take like all the ayahuasca in the world or something, you would never come up with an outcome this outlandish and hard to believe. But that's where we're at, and it's an unprecedented moment. We're trying to figure it out. But I think that us asking, like, WTF is happening at Tesla is a very valid question right now.
Yeah. I wouldn't. I mean, I don't think we would have expected this outcome even like 3 weeks ago.
No.
It has all happened really fast. Yeah, and I wonder, like, I wonder what the impact is going to be on Tesla. I think that there are a lot of people who will not buy the cars because of what Elon Musk has been doing. There's a lot of people who are maybe selling their cars. I wonder about the potential of like a brain drain at Tesla, which is, one of our, like, for better or worse, the dominant EV maker in America and a very innovative and forward-thinking company. And like, if you're like a recent grad coming out of engineering school, like, and you have the choice to work at Tesla or somewhere else, I don't know. I think that there's going to be a lot of people who either leave this company or decide not to work there because they don't want to be a part of all this noise. Although there's always been noise around Tesla, so maybe not. But I wonder what the fallout will be for this company.
I think especially like that question of like, are you going to go work there? Are you going to believe in this? It's all predicated in faith in one man. And on a lot of levels, I personally find that to be a dangerous thing. You know what I mean? Because people are fallible and they're self-interested, and it's just a lot of faith. I know that we're in a time in this country where we feel like everything else has failed us in a lot of ways, but I don't know if putting our faith in this guy collectively is I know it's not. I know it's not going to end well for us, but I think it's now a question of how are we going to figure that out or not, but we'll see. And we'll see how Q2's earnings call goes, right, Tim?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was expecting, like, in like Slack before we were listening to the call, like, I was taking bets on, is he even going to show up? And he did. He did not. I would have assumed that he was so consumed with all the government stuff that he was just not even going to show up. I guess he did Tesla shareholders that service of being like, hey, I still exist. Like, I'm still the CEO here. I still am paying attention to this company, at least somewhat. And he didn't, and he also didn't mention politics on the call, which I thought was notable. He was asked about EV policy and what he thinks the right EV policy is. And he did not take the opportunity to, like, name drop Trump and talk about, like, how great, his vision of eliminating EV tax credits is. He kind of took a very measured response to that.
It was interesting. He said it's sustainable transportation is inevitable. It's already happening. It's inevitable. It's as inevitable as the transition away from horses to gas-powered cars, which I agree with. And it was a good, oddly measured response, like you said, from a guy who's really, like, dialed up the bluster in recent years. It was a bit of a punt because I think that, if he is up there saying let's end EV tax credits and other subsidies, and a lot of smart people think that would hurt them too, I think that's a valid question to answer for his shareholders. But it was something,
Yeah. So we're gonna have to see how things play out with this company over the rest of the year. Like, they have projected big increases in sales this year on the back of those new cars that we know nothing about. We'll have the robotaxi rollout happening in June, supposedly. So we'll be keeping a close eye on all of that.
Yeah. I just watched the more affordable models. It's gonna be like a first gen Model Y with like cloth seats, like some Nissan you rent at the airport or something. Like that's it, you know.
It could be. It really could be.
Hey, if it's 25 grand, like that ain't a bad deal, you know. All right, now we're really going to shift gears here. We have our first ever guest interview on the Plugged In podcast, hopefully the first of many. And he's someone who is working to change the EV landscape in one of the most difficult places to do that, New York City. The company's called Revel, and if you live in New York, you've probably seen their neon blue Teslas and Kias zipping around, those rideshare cars, and you might have also used their DC EV fast charging stations. And that's a big part of what Revel wants to do more of in this country, and probably in your city soon too.
I think it was a really good conversation. I think the one thing that I'll note is that we recorded this a couple of weeks ago, right after the Trump inauguration. So if anything sounds slightly dated, because funding for charging was paused and then unpaused, and now, who knows. But we got into that a little bit. And so if it sounds 3 weeks old, that's why.
Yeah, and I the only thing I'll add before we dive into this too is, you might be like, oh, why do I care if I don't live in New York? And I would just be like, do you know how hard it is to build or do anything in New York City? Like if they can do it there, they can kind of do it anywhere in America. So I feel like this company is always interesting to us because they're clearing out the roadblocks in the hardest places to do it, and they're like defeating the final boss of cities. And like once you do that, you can like do anything. So without further ado, here's our interview with Frank Reig, the co-founder and CEO of Revel. Frank, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, Patrick, great being here. I really appreciate the invite.
How's your year been going so far in the ride share and charging space, just in general?
It's been going good. We actually have several sites under construction right now. We have 2 big ribbon cuttings in February, one in the San Francisco Bay Area and one here in New York City at JFK Airport. So things are looking good right now.
And when you say sites, like to folks who like don't live in New York, haven't taken a Revel yet, get to live in places where like the driving experience is more pleasant than New York City, which is everywhere. Tell us what that means by sites, what you just said.
Yeah. The easiest way to describe it is just think gas stations of the future. So big corner lot with 15, 25, or even some of the sites we're building, 60 fast chargers all in one location. So the 2 sites I mentioned going live next month, one is 12 stalls, right, the Mission District of San Francisco, and one is 24 stalls right at the JFK rideshare taxi waiting lot. So we tend to build larger sites. We're not putting 2 stalls at a Whole Foods. We're putting 20, 30, 60 stalls in a really strategic location in some of our biggest, densest cities here in the U.S.
And these are all fast chargers that you're building, right?
Correct. So everything we're putting in the ground moving forward is 250 kW or more in terms of charging speeds. So really, I would say the biggest barrier to us on charging speeds is probably the cars themselves nowadays. A lot of them maybe don't even accept 250 or 350. But we are looking to definitely future-proof our service and the network we're building.
Yeah, so your company's had a really interesting evolution. You started in rentable, by the hour, if I remember right, electric scooters and mopeds in New York City. Then you moved into the electric ride-hailing space. Now you're getting into charging too. Like that's quite a trajectory that you've pulled off. Like, how did that work exactly?
Yeah, so this company started 7 years ago. And this company started in shared electric mopeds. So think of a Vespa that tops out at 30 miles an hour. You don't need a motorcycle license for it. And we scaled that business from a pilot of 60-something to over 6,000 across 6 markets over the course of 2 years, right? So that was really the first phase of this company up until 2019, early 2020. My co-founder and I realized where the real market opportunity here is in the U.S. And the real way to electrify transportation in cities is you got to go after the 4-wheeled sector. That is the United States. If you're not touching the 4-wheeled sector, how much of a dent are you really making? And then we started to see this chicken or egg problem that we have in cities, or I should say had, which is you don't want to go out, spend all this money on CapEx for charging infrastructure when there's not a lot of usage and demand for that charging infrastructure yet. You're just losing money. And who wants an EV if there's not a ubiquitous, dense, reliable, fast charging network in the city you live in? So we saw that. We launched in 2021, building a fast charging network. We started with a 25-stall site in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and paired that with 50 EVs and an all-electric rideshare service. And then since then, we've been scaling both sides of that business. So now we have 5 large sites here in New York. Our next one coming, I already mentioned JFK next month. and we have over 500 EVs in our electric rideshare service, and I've really scaled that. I would say the phase we're entering now is in certain cities that egg is hatched, the chicken is born. I don't know what you want to call it. There are certain markets like the Bay Area where we're entering as of next month. We're not bringing Revel rideshare. The public utilization numbers are there. The public EV adoption is there. Rideshare is electrifying in places like California by 2030 by mandate. So we don't need to bring our own demand anymore. The world has changed over the last 4 or 5 years.
Gotcha. And just I want to put to Tim too, because like he's a Bay Area guy and he knows the lay of the land when it comes to EVs out there extremely well. But when you talk about the chicken and the egg, it sounds like I'm trying to get this metaphor right. Which is the chicken and which is the egg, right? But it sounds like there are so many EVs, including rideshare, in places like California, like you mentioned. Like you don't need to operate rideshare there. You could primarily be a charging operation. Is that a correct read on the situation?
Correct. If you just think about EV adoption in places like the Bay Area, places like LA, let's look at public filings from folks like EVgo. Their utilization rate just continues to tick up quarter over quarter over quarter. And then the other thing about urban areas, whether it's LA, San Francisco, New York, all places we're building, these are places where there simply is just the focus wasn't there for everybody over the last 10 years. There is not nearly enough fast charging infrastructure in these cities. Mm-hmm. So EV adoption is heading up and to the right. We could talk about how much up and to the right, but it is heading up and to the right. And the charging infrastructure is just not keeping pace in these cities. So it's a huge opportunity to still be a first mover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How much of your utilization in New York is, your rideshare vehicles versus, other rideshare? I know other rideshare is also a big part of it versus, maybe the third part of that is just regular like people and their EVs. How does that kind of break down and how has it changed over time?
It's a great example. If you look at our, I believe we have 86 stalls now in New York City across our sites. If you look at utilization rates in New York, if we were talking 2 years ago, it'd be like 90% Revel fleet is providing utilization to those stalls.
Wow.
Today, it is majority public. So it's a huge shift, especially in the last 12 months. A big piece of that is at the city level, they mandated all 100,000 plus rideshare vehicles in New York City. 100,000 of these vehicles have to be electric by 2030. So that's a huge regulatory tailwind we started to feel in a big way last year. So it's got to the point now where, yes, Revel rideshare in New York still provides a certain amount of utilization. The majority is now public.
We write about Revel on InsideEVs quite a bit, not because our whole audience is in New York City. I don't think terribly many of them are. Maybe a good amount are. But we bring this up just because it's like that Jay-Z line. Like, if I could do it here, I could do it anywhere. It's so hard to do anything and build anything in New York City, right? That, like, if companies like yours are solving these problems of electrifying transit in that city, surely those lessons can be applied elsewhere. It can be done maybe faster, easier, better elsewhere. Has that been your experience so far? Like, you pick like the hardest place to build EV charging infrastructure like in America, and you're making it work. So, like, has that been kind of the goal here?
Absolutely. The way I usually describe it to people is building in cities like New York is a Venn diagram of problems you need to figure out. So if you think about that Venn diagram of problems, you have just access to power in the grid. It's a major barrier. Just finding 2, 4, 6 megawatts on the grid, good luck.
Yeah.
Even in places where they bring you an upgrade, it might take 10 plus years. So then the site's dead. So power access, access to power in the grid. Then you have zoning and planning boards and what is the zoning of that site? Can you get a certificate of occupancy for fast charging? So just that whole bucket. Then you have permitting. What if you need to move a fire hydrant or sidewalk tree in order to drop a transformer, into that site? And then you have rational landlord. I think something people don't talk about enough, because in cities like New York and San Francisco, landlords are all city-owned gold mines. If you have a nice corner lot in a strategic location, you're just waiting for the best deal. There's no fire under you to get a deal done. And maybe you want to create optionality. You don't want to sign a 30-year lease. You may want to build a condo there in 5 years. So it's really hard just to find business terms and everything else I mentioned to line up. And then you also just have to deal with the bureaucracy of the city. Getting all of these things moving in parallel to get a ribbon cutting like the one at JFK Airport next month. So it is definitely expertise that we've built over the last 4 or 5 years. And also the pipeline of sites we've built. Some of these sites we signed in 2022. They're going live this year in 2025. This stuff takes 3 years a lot of times. So yeah, It's hard. I think we've been developing the talent internally and the know-how to get this done, and have learned a lot along the way, to be honest.
Yeah, and so how much of it do you think is you guys learned? Like you're expanding faster, right? You're expanding into new cities. How much of that is you guys learning how these processes work and how to streamline things versus like maybe cities like New York or landlords or these utilities or whoever getting more hip to this and realizing they can now streamline things? You know, they've learned the processes and they're now thinking, okay, let's move these fast chargers ahead a little bit faster.
Yeah. I'll give you a great example of that. We have our first site in the Bay Area going live next month. We have 7 more behind it going live in the next 12 months, right? So we're going to have 8 sites live sitting here 12 months from now in the Bay Area. So it's quite a build out that's happening. One thing we learned with Con Edison here in New York is you have to sit across the table from each other and put a project opening date on the table that you both agree to that is also aggressive. And then you need to figure out what are all the ways we need to work together and communicate to actually hit that target date. And we're going to do everything on our side to make sure we're delivering on that. And by doing that, they're going to deliver everything on their side to actually make it happen. So it's a small nuance here, but now taking that learning from Con Ed, now bringing that to PG&E. Hey, here's sites we're building in the next 12 months. When can you all energize these sites? That informs our construction schedule. Let's be realistic but aggressive. And let's work together to get a lot more fast chargers in the Bay Area for everyone that's living there, right? So I think one thing we learned is, man, it requires a lot of coordination and a lot of communication and just straight up teamwork with the utility, and making sure you deliver on your side of the bargain.
You know, one of the first like EVs I like really spent a lot of time in the modern era was I think it was like 2018 when I was the editor of Jalopnik. I had a Chevy Bolt when it had just come out, and I loved it. I really won me over. I've always liked that vehicle, but I spent a day driving around New York City trying to find like a non-Tesla plug to charge it. And thankfully that's not the case anymore. Like people are kind of surprised. Like New York City has actually gotten pretty good at like adding charging infrastructure, thanks in part to companies like yours, but it still doesn't feel like enough yet. I mean, if you have a city like New York, 5 boroughs, and we're looking at a future where everything's mostly electric or maybe all electric, what is enough? Like what does that look like for you? Is it ample plugs, ample supply, ample electricity? Like when do we get to the point where it's like, okay, this is viable for basically everybody?
I think it's naturally happening just from hardware technology. So when I say that, I'm talking about how does the battery technology, let's say an Ioniq 5 or a Kia EV6, now drive a charge to a 20-minute charge time, not 35.
Yeah.
20. How do we get that to 13? How do we get that to 10? So when I think about adoption, there's a couple of things. It's just like hardware continuing to improve and to make the experience better for charging. And on the other side, it's also just, we need a lot more charging sites in cities like New York. We just do. I mean, we just put a 10-stall site on the FDR of Manhattan, Lower East Side of Manhattan about 3 months ago. That site without any Revel fleet is already getting 12 stall sessions per day.
Meaning each stall is going to have at least 12 cars per day using it.
Yeah, without any marketing and no Revel fleet. And that's not a small site. It's 10 stalls. It's not 2, it's 10. So it's already doing over 100 charge sessions a day with no marketing. So again, there's such an appetite for more fast charging in urban areas. And then you have policies, like I mentioned earlier, where 100,000 rideshare vehicles need to be electric in 5 years. Currently, only 1/10 of them are. That's a big tidal wind behind you.
Yeah, and what do you think? So maybe I understand you might be, you're a little biased here maybe, but what do you think is the role of slower charging, of level 2 charging? Like, is that something that you would ever get into? You know, fast charging is great, and fast charging is maybe the solution, the only real solution for rideshare, somebody that needs to, you know, charge and get back out there. But if everybody else, like, is level 2, are we going to just need like thousands and thousands of these level 2 chargers, like on every sidewalk in New York?
So I think you need charging everywhere and all different kinds. So I'm a true believer in fast charging. I also love the idea as car charging gets faster, you can put more throughput through a site, which improves your economics and creates more revenue and profit. So if you just take a stall that we've signed for 30 years, imagine as charging speeds get faster, you can not just do 12 cars in that stall per day, you could do 30. My cost basis is the same. So fast charging to me is a very exciting business longer term if you plan correctly, grow at the right pace so that you're just constantly in that, green of profitability. But then if you think about charge speeds as they increase across the same cost basis, it's a really exciting business.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need both. Condo buildings should have level 2. Not everyone lives in a condo building in a city like San Francisco or New York and has access to a level 2 charger. Most New Yorkers, park their car in the street. So you're going to need a fast charger. You're going to need a fast charging network.
Then there's the time-tested New York City solution, which is running a 100-foot extension cord out your window onto the street, maybe with something covering the cord, but maybe also not, and just hoping the city never finds out. I've never written about that because I worried if I did, like, Eric Adams would outlaw it or something, but like that's a thing people there do too, to drive their Teslas or whatever.
I will say, too, a lot of times if you're trying to dig a trench, put conduit in, whether it's level 2 or a fast charger on a sidewalk, the cost can be the same. Or
Interesting.
Nearly. So some of the pilots they've done, let's say in New York City, I saw some of the cost numbers for each of the level 2s they put in. It was quite expensive. So in my mind, you're talking cost at that level. It probably makes more sense to do fast chargers, a lot more throughput, a lot more cars can get charged.
Just so I understand the trenching and sort of like there are certain costs that would be the same between level 2 and level 3, whereas I mean obviously the cabinet itself, like the charger itself, is going to be way more expensive for level 3, but those kind of outside costs might just like the construction costs might be pretty similar.
And you got to remember all the soft costs too, all the design costs, the permitting costs. No matter what you're putting in the sidewalk, it's going to cost a lot. That being said, I also know there are some really unique designs out there nowadays where they're trying not to trench, they're trying not to put conduit in the sidewalk, they're trying to reduce permitting. So again, like more power to those guys. I hope they're successful on the level 2 side. I just think if we're going to actually make progress and do it quickly, we need a dense fast charging network, especially when you're talking about city environments where time is money for everybody.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you just need something in 10, 20 minutes. You can't wait 10 hours.
Yeah, or you give people a place to go during alternate side parking days to just juice up their cars, in which case, if you figure that out, they'll probably throw a parade for you and make you like a hero or something. I was going to ask you, you kind of alluded this to the beginning of our chat, Frank, but, about EV growth and where it's at versus expectations. And, one thing that we wrote about a lot last year at InsideEVs was there was a ton of doom and gloom in the wider media space. When you look at the actual numbers, it grew. It was another record year of EV sales. It made up 8% of the U.S. market. We're all electric last year. It seems like it's slowing down, but still growing. But do you worry about growth and fitting your business model, especially things like the EV tax credits go away? Or do you feel like this market's going to naturally mature to meet what you're trying to build?
So I would say something like 8% of new vehicle sales are EV across the country. I don't care about the whole country because my business is the biggest, densest cities here in the U.S. Right. We're very just screaming from the hilltops. We are driving EV adoption in urban areas. And the only way to do that is to have the biggest, densest fast charging network for anybody else. Right. So for me, it's biggest, densest cities. And if you look at some of the cities that we're building, like San Francisco, like LA, like New York, now that rideshares will be fully electric by 2030, EV sales are heading very much in the right direction. And they're way above 8% in places like San Francisco and LA. So it's hard to look at a stat like that and say, oh, how does your business work on 8%? Well, in places like San Francisco or LA, it's way higher than 8%.
Yeah.
So you have to, look at everything at a city market level, not at a US level. With that being said, though, anytime there's a change in DC or a change in policy, what happens to, let's say, some of the blue states at the local and state level? They dig their heels in even more, right? You already see Newsom saying, hey, if you take away the EV tax credit for new vehicle sales, I'll do it at the state level. So it's just interesting how, federal policies go one direction and then you have city and state policies maybe more aggressively head in the other, just as a counterweight and counterbalance. So in general, we're planning our business where there's tailwinds around electrification. New York City has an electrification mandate for rideshare by 2030. The entire state of California has a rideshare electrification mandate by 2032. We are aggressively investing there, right? That is a very safe bet to make right now.
Mm-hmm. And I guess more generally, we're recording this the day after inauguration, the day after new President Trump issued various executive orders, including ones that are supposed to stop, any activity around the federal funding for chargers from NEVI and from CFI. Do you think that, what do you think he can actually do? What do you think this new administration can actually do to, slow down this charger funding? And I guess what kind of impact might that have on the charging business generally, right?
So as a business, even as we continue to raise money for our charging sites, everything in that financial model that we share with investors and we base our investment decisions on in terms of where we put capital and where we're building has nothing from federal policy. Nothing. Doesn't have the IRA 30C. If it happens, great. We already monetized one credit here in New York and got hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fantastic. So if we have that tailwind, great. I'm not making investment decisions based on it and needing it. So that's just like how we ran our business from day one, which is why generally any executive orders that came out yesterday, Revel today, everyone internally is like, okay, whichever way this wind blows or where it ends up, we have our business. We've made our decisions without that risk in it. And then the other piece I'll just say is that one thing we definitely bake into our investment decisions and where we put capital and the sites we're building is utility incentives. So places like New York, Con Edison, their Make Ready program for fast charging, they pay 50+% of the CapEx for sites. It is a very lucrative program that incentivizes companies like us to build, and it has nothing to do with DC. And it's as of right. It's not something you apply for. As long as you check all the boxes, you get the money. So things like that, we definitely focus on. Utility incentives, extremely important to our business, have nothing to do with policy risk. Whatever happens with the ITC, 30C tax credit, hey, if I'm able to monetize that, fantastic. More fuel to the fire. If I'm not, we never baked it in. And when it comes to net CFI, we're going to continue to apply until we hear otherwise.
Yeah, which is good for Revel, but like zooming out, just like when you look at the entire industry you operate in, like what's your read on the new administration? And like, do you think that if NEVI funds were to be halted tomorrow, like what do you think that does to the whole business, the whole ecosystem, and maybe EV growth too, like from what you're immersed in?
It will slow things down. There's no question. How could it not, right? You're pulling back funding, you're pulling back grants, you're pulling back incentives. Yeah, that will slow things down. I think my only point is we never made investment decisions or strategic decisions based on those grants or getting those grants. So for us, I guess we're just a lot calmer today. But clearly I'd be happier if all that money was still on the table.
I mean, it does feel like, and I hear this complaint a lot in the auto industry too. It's like it feels like there is just this 180 shift that happens every 4 years now with American public policy specifically. And like, you could talk to car makers, you could talk to Mercedes-Benz, Ford, GM, and a lot of them will just say, like, just tell us what the rules are. We need to know what the rules are, and they're going to be the same rules long-term so we can play the game. But it does feel like we are going from, like, one really abrupt policy shift here to another one that could well happen in another 2 to 4 years. I mean, that's a tricky space to build transit around, I feel like.
I mean, the other piece here too is, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not like a complete expert in this, but everything from what I understand is in order to change tax law, it has to go through Congress again.
Yeah.
And once something touches Congress, who knows what's going to happen? So things like all of these red states getting a ton of investment dollars and a ton of tax credits to incentivize job growth and improve the economy in these places, they want to give those up? Those politicians are going to say no problem? So I don't know where this is going to end up. I think there'll be a lot of discussions. There'll be a lot of, I know what's going to happen, and then something totally else happens. But I do know that anything on the tax credit side, it looks like that's going to be a long conversation with a lot of different stakeholders. But again, my perspective sitting here in New York.
To talk about the rideshare aspect of what you do too, if you're in New York, you're new to it or you're visiting, and what's your sales pitch for why somebody should take Revel over Uber or Lyft, especially as a lot of those become electric too? Like, what do you think is the advantage you guys have as a service versus some of the others?
Yeah, I think it's a premium vehicle. I think anytime you get into a Revel, it's cleaned on a shift basis. You know exactly what you're getting from a car quality and a driver quality point of view. And at the end of the day, you know it's going to be electric. And I would also say, especially where Uber and Lyft pricing has gone in the last couple of years, I think we're generally underpriced to them. I think coming out of COVID, Uber and Lyft have raised their prices pretty significantly. It's also another piece.
Yeah, I remember that for sure. And right now you guys run Tesla Model Ys and 3s, the Kia Niro EVs, I believe. Any other additions on the horizon too, maybe, that's going to wear the Revel Blue at some point?
We're definitely looking at a bunch of different EVs, but I would say right now, nothing to report. But yeah, those are the three that we currently have in our fleet: Niro, Model 3, Model Y.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, the Ion, I think you mentioned the Ioniq 5 or a Hyundai is like, as an example of something that's like really harnessing the power of charging infrastructure. And something that can charge faster than most. Like, I would imagine, is that kind of the direction that you would go in? Is like, we want, rideshare cars that can charge as fast as we possibly can to get these things back out on the road.
I would say our decision making is a little different. We run a depot model. Drivers come back to the depot. Whether a car charges in 20 minutes or 24 minutes doesn't make too much of a difference. So I would say for us, it's price, quality, and does that OEM really want to work with us?
Yeah, where do you see this going in 5 years? Like, we're as we just said, we're in kind of an uncertain spot as of like yesterday with EVs and chargers in general, but we also know where the market's going globally. Where do you see Revel in 5 years? Like, where do you want to see that as we begin to close out this decade for your business?
When you think about the last 10 years of EVs, where was EV adoption? It was high net worth individuals in suburban areas that have home and garage driveway charging. That has generally been EV adoption until now. The next 10 years is all about cities, middle and lower income folks, the entire rideshare industry electrifying. That is a very different world, very different needs. We are pointing our business to be the leader there, right? Urban electrification, using rideshare to accelerate it forward. So that's been our thesis for 3 or 4 years. It is actually happening as we sit here. And I've never had more conviction around where we're bringing this company in terms of that regard.
Awesome. Frank Reig from Revel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Frank.
All right, now it's time for Plus Minus, our segment where we talk about who's up and who's down in the EV world this week. Tim, who you got?
Yeah, I have a plus this week, and it even has to do with EV policy, which is something that I think is generally a depressing topic lately with a lot of uncertainty. But our friends at Heatmap News, which is a climate news site, had a story about how the EV tax credit is actually going on just fine right now. The Trump administration ordered a pause of all sorts of funding from the IRA and from the infrastructure law, funding for chargers and all sorts of climate stuff. That pause has now been paused or reversed.
The pause has been paused, yes.
The pause has been paused.
Yes.
But there's a lot of uncertainty around the future of these EV policies and even like the current status of whether funding is going to go out to projects. But the good news is that the National Automobile Dealers Association, the trade group that represents dealers, says that their dealers have not had any trouble accessing the system where they apply basically to get reimbursed for the credits that EV buyers get. So right now, a little bit of a tangent, but like you used to have to apply for your tax credit, your EV credit at tax time. Now the dealer can just give you a discount and they get the credit instead from the IRS. And so apparently that whole system has been going on just fine as of Wednesday, February 5th. Like, we'll see if that changes because stuff has been changing in Washington really quickly. But good news from Heatmap that is going on just fine.
That is great. And it wasn't last year. Like, some dealers had trouble signing up and there were issues getting the payments through. It worked just fine when we got our Kia. Like, that was done right at point of sale too, which was rad. So like, yeah, I'm glad to hear that system, for as long as it may exist, is going well for dealers. So check out that story and read and subscribe to Heatmap News. It's a wonderful group of journalists and some good friends over there covering climate and the green energy transition. They're folks are doing the Lord's work as far as I'm concerned. My plus this week is Honda. We didn't even get to go into this, but breaking news out of Asia this morning as the Honda-Nissan merger may now completely be off the table. It turns out that the Nissan board wasn't too happy with the situation. They weren't happy with being kind of a subsidiary to Honda, even though Honda is much more profitable and successful than Nissan right now. And Honda was kind of riding to their rescue. So this is kind of like, if you have like a date with somebody that you're like not super into, and then they message you like, you know what, this isn't working out for me. And you're like, okay, all right, well, all's well that ends well. So I don't know if that deal is going to be completely off the table, the Honda Nissan merger, but there were a lot of things that didn't make sense about it, including like the ways that these companies like directly competed with each other, and the fact that like Honda wasn't too jazzed about it, and they couldn't really figure out like why it was beneficial to them to merge with Nissan. So it works out. It's good news for Honda because like that company's about to do some really cool stuff on like the EV and software and battery front. It's one of my favorite companies to cover. Like it's a really engineering focused, interesting place. And I think they're going to be better off without this partner potentially. I hate to say dragging them down, but then, it brings in the question, like who comes in to save Nissan's ass, because Nissan last year said we have 12 to 14 months of runway before we're looking at bankruptcy. So that's going to be very interesting to watch this year if that happens at all. And I'm not ruling out a Chinese car company coming in and snatching them up to get some foothold into the U.S. market or something,
Yeah, for sure. That would be super interesting. Or Foxconn, like we've talked about, Taiwanese contract manufacturer that makes iPhones. They've been circling that merger as well. So
they've been wanting to get into cars for a minute too. So that it's not another Japanese car company is going to make this super interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people at Honda are resting well tonight. So we'll see how that one goes. All right. Thanks for listening to the Plugged In podcast from Inside EVs. We'll be back next Friday. Today's show was produced by Michael Perkins and is brought to you by the Motorsport Network.
Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, leave us a review, and tell a friend to tune in. And if you liked what you heard, you can read all our EV coverage on InsideEVs.com. See you next time.
Thanks all.